Well, thank you. I'm the Vice-Chancellor and President of Griffith University, which will become relevant for a number of reasons that I'll come to in a moment. Can I too join in respectfully acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today and paying my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending. Well, Griffith Uni is delighted to be sponsoring the event today as part of our long and deep relationship with CEDA. There has never been a more important time to have serious discussion and debate around the critical issues impacting Australia. Over the last couple of years, both our economy and society have been buffeted by a pandemic, a series of natural disasters, increasingly fraught geopolitical environment, the impact of climate change, digital disruption, and much more. There are opportunities in the context in which we find ourselves, but Australia is going to need to have a sophisticated new way of thinking to navigate the complex environment in which we now operate. Today's event, therefore, is an important opportunity to come together to talk about the issues that confront us all. Indeed, the critical role of serious discussion on issues of the day is something that unites CEDA and Griffith. I note CEDA's long-standing commitment to rigorous economic debate for this country, and I thank them for it. CEDA's role as a conduit for strategic policy discussions across many different sectors is important, particularly during a time of change. Universities like Griffith are certainly also parts of this debate, informed participants, but we are also actors, drivers ourselves of sustainable economic growth. Universities are indeed uniquely positioned to deliver on national priorities around industry-led innovation and creating the workforce of the future. We are, in many regions, one of the most significant employers. We provide high-quality jobs, community and sporting facilities, cultural and educational opportunities, now to areas that have not always been served well historically. Importantly, the research that will create a brighter future for Australia, both economically and socially, is in part being developed in our universities. Advances in both biomedical and technological research undertaken at Griffith, for example, range from a vaccine to malaria, to repairing spinal cord injury, lighter materials for space and aviation industries, robotics for assisting in agricultural production, and working on the links between chronic fatigue and long COVID. Yet in this time of rapid digital change, we will also focus on what makes us uniquely human: creativity, empathy, a sense of justice. This drives our work in areas from breaking the cycle of disadvantage for children whose mothers are in prison to creating more inclusive futures for people in disabilities. It reiterates for us the importance of our strong commitment to the creative and the performing arts. And some of you might have seen just over the last week, Griffith Film School alumnus Lachlan Pendragon saw his film nominated for an Academy Award. To support the economic resilience of Australia, we need to ensure that economic benefits are shared. Griffith is committed to supporting our students to ensure that talented people in our community have the opportunity for a high-quality first-class education, including those who have not been traditionally involved in higher education. We're proud, for example, to have graduated 180 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders from a wide range of disciplines last year, including 8 people with PhDs, and we celebrate the fact that over 40% of our students are the first in their family to attend university. Relevantly today, one Griffith alumnus of whom we are particularly proud is our Speaker, the Treasurer, the Honourable Jim Chalmers. We're doubly pleased to be involved with the event, given the Federal Treasurer is not only an alumnus, but also the Federal MP for our Logan campus, where he continues to be a strong advocate for the local community. As many of you know, the Honourable Dr Jim Chalmers has been Member for Rankin in the House of Representatives since 2013. He served as Shadow Treasurer and Shadow Minister for Finance, and prior to his election to Parliament, he was Executive Director of the Chifley Research Centre and Chief of Staff to Deputy Prime Minister and Treasurer Wayne Swan during the global financial crisis, which just goes to show some people have all the luck. After completing his Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Communication at Griffith University, in case you didn't notice it the first 2 times I slid it in, Dr Chalmers went on to complete his PhD on the Prime Ministership of Paul Keating at ANU, which is another perfectly respectable university. I know we're all very interested to hear what he has to say today, so without any further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming Queensland's son, Federal Treasurer, the Honourable Jim Chalmers.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can I thank Sharon for guiding the proceedings this afternoon? Can I thank Uncle Thomas for the very kind and very generous way that he shared culture with us a moment ago when he welcomed us to country? Can I also acknowledge the elders, the customs, the traditions of the Yuggera people this side of the Maiwar, all the way down to where I'm from, the Berrinba, Logan City. I wanted to express as well, as others have, my gratitude to everybody here who is committed to the cause of recognition and consultation, which is at the very core of the voice to Parliament that we will be putting to the people before the end of the year. Now, towards the end of a week that has already taken me to Sydney, Canberra and Perth, can I say how much I appreciate this opportunity to address CEDA again, but particularly here on home turf here in Brisbane, and in front of such a big and important crowd full of familiar faces right around the room. CEDA is, as Carolyn said, an absolutely indispensable part of our national economic conversation, and I'm really pleased that I could accept this invitation today. I wanted to thank Clint and Jared and Sharon and all of the team at CEDA for the way that you elevate and educate the national economic policy conversation in this country. Now, the last time I was here at the Convention Centre with Carolyn, Griffith was naming Andrew Fraser, the first alumnus of our university, to be its Chancellor. And I wanted to thank Carolyn and Griffith for that, but also for supporting this gathering today and for your very kind introduction a moment ago, Carolyn. As you can probably tell, I'm really, really proud of my association with Griffith University, and I'm pleased that Andrew, the new Chancellor, is also here today, as well as another classmate of ours from that golden era of Griffith, Senator Anthony Chisholm, the Assistant Minister for Education and the Regions as well. I wanted to acknowledge the Commonwealth Bank and thank them for sponsoring today, along with Technology One. We appreciate that a great deal. And I wanted to acknowledge somebody who is more important to me than the Prime Minister, the Chairman of the Broncos, Carl Morris, who's in the front row as well. And all of you who've taken the time to be here today to gather with us and to share a few perspectives. There are a number of reasons why now is an absolutely perfect time to share some thoughts and some perspectives about our national economy. And one of those reasons is that tomorrow I'll be releasing the Productivity Commission's 5-yearly review of Australia's productivity performance. So today I wanted to tell you what to expect in that important report, how the Albanese government is grappling with its major themes and directions, what we are interested in progressing, and where we think we already have a better way forward when it comes to satisfying some of these important economic objectives. I wanted to warn you, when you see it tomorrow, this PC report, it's almost 1,000 pages long. There are 9 volumes and 71 recommendations. I received it last month. I've been getting my head around it and briefing my ministerial colleagues on it since then. I'm not obligated to release it until after the budget, the second half of May, but I'm putting it out there a couple of months early because I want you to be able to work your way through it as well. I want you to be able to engage with it and make your own mind up about its key conclusions. But also I want to release it now because so much of what's happening in our economy goes to our ability to build a more productive and a more prosperous economy, more stable and resilient and secure, and one that creates more opportunities for more of our people. And today, we heard earlier this morning that the unemployment rate is back down to 3.5%, a truly remarkable outcome in the context and in these conditions. But a reminder as well that even though we've got a lot coming at us from around the world, we've got a lot going for us here in Australia as well. Low unemployment, the beginnings of wages growth, and really incredible prices for what we sell the world as well. But on every day this week, we've also been reminded of the big challenges that are laid out before us in our economy. On Monday, I convened a meeting of APRA, ASIC, the RBA, the Treasury and relevant ministers to monitor and understand the implications and the exposures of what's happened to Silicon Valley Bank in the US. Our regulators are on top of things, our banks are well capitalised with strong liquidity positions, but it's still a reminder of the risks, the uncertainties and the vulnerabilities in the global economy as interest rates rise around the world. By Tuesday, we announced the biggest industrial undertaking in our history, the new AUKUS deal, which is a crucial investment in our national security and in our national economy as well. It's a game-changing plan to broaden and deepen our industrial base, but it's also a reminder of the substantial pressures on the budget that have largely come from the 5 fastest growing areas of government spending: interest costs on debt, the NDIS, aged care, healthcare and defence. The same day, on Tuesday, and while I was in Perth, the new GST relativities were released. And these were a reminder of some of our other fiscal challenges, state and federal, including, in our case, the increasing cost of the deal to provide WA that GST floor of 70 cents in the dollar, but also the pressures that come from the renewal of expiring national agreements, which will need to be funded over the next 12 to 18 months. The interim default market offer, which was released yesterday and goes to the forward prices in our energy markets, was a reminder of the inflation challenge that we still confront even as inflation moderates in our economy. Now, our interventions in the energy market are working well to take some of the sting out of those price rises, which are less than half the size they would have been without our action in December. But people will still be doing it tough as inflation hangs around in our economy higher than we would like for longer than we'd like. Now, in the near term, our ability to withstand these inflationary pressures, these fiscal constraints and global uncertainties will come down to the best combination of relief, repair and restraint. Responsible cost of living relief where we can afford it, repair when it comes to our supply side issues and restraint in the budget. That was the strategy of the budget in October, and these will be guiding principles in May as well. But in the medium term and in the longer term, our success will be determined by whether or not we can lift living standards, and that will be determined in turn by whether we can put the woeful productivity performance we saw during the wasted decade behind us. Now, this won't be easy or quick, but together we can begin to methodically turn around some of the perennial challenges in our economy, with a goal of improving productivity not for its own sake, but because of what it represents: an expanded speed limit on our economy to enable and empower growth with low inflation, and grounds for sustainable wage increases, which could lift living standards for working people in this decade and the next. Now, to do better, we need to understand better the dimensions of this productivity problem. So I wanted to give you what I think are 5 pretty stunning facts from the Productivity Commission report that I'll release tomorrow, because I think these facts put into perspective what we're dealing with. The first one is that our productivity growth in the past decade has been the slowest in 60 years, averaging just 1.1% a year, worse than the decade before and barely half the rate achieved during the 1990s. Secondly, between 1970 and 2020, Australia slipped 10 places in productivity rankings, falling from 6th to 16th in the OECD over that period. Thirdly, this means our productivity is now 22% lower than in the United States. Fourth, if we'd kept up with the 60-year average for productivity growth, national income would have been around $4,600 per person higher in 2020. And fifth, if we stay stuck on the current course that we are on, the Productivity Commission projects future incomes will be 40% lower and the working week 5% longer as a consequence. Now, these figures are useful illustrations of the productivity challenge, but they're not forecasts and they're not predetermined outcomes. And later, I want to come back to how we measure productivity and whether we are approaching it the right way. But it's clear and it matters that on every traditional measure of productivity, Australia has been flatlining. Australia does have a productivity problem. And the report that I'm releasing tomorrow refers often to the headwinds in our economy that contribute to this problem. And it's true that much of what we confront can be problematic if it's mismanaged or if it's ignored. But in a spirit of optimism, I wanted to suggest to you today that we can turn the headwinds identified by the Productivity Commission into tailwinds in our economy. Now, the report does a good job of identifying 5 key trends and transitions. Firstly, the large and growing services sector. Secondly, the costs of climate change. Thirdly, the need for a more skilled and adaptable workforce. Fourthly, the use of data and digital technology. And 5, economic dynamism in a changed world of geopolitical tension and uncertainty, which is putting up barriers. Now, these are hard areas for a reason. All of them are complex. None of them will respond to quick fix, easy win, whack-a-mole policy making. In the Productivity Commission's view, the non-market services sector, including the care economy, which has averaged zero productivity growth since 2000, will naturally expand and drag on productivity as our population ages. And that transition will be happening in the context of another one, a move towards net zero that will require billions of dollars of investment by 2050. Now, this will help us avoid some of the worst impacts of climate change, but it will also help create new sources of growth that will lift our productivity performance over time. Now, these transformations will require investments in a highly skilled workforce, and for that, we need better education and training systems that can supply the skills and labour that we need, and which can enable the digital revolution to happen in a way that enhances rather than just replaces work, helping to diffuse ideas and technology across more of our economy. Now, all of this in the context of significant geopolitical uncertainty that will present its own headwinds if not handled correctly, with serious fiscal constraints as well, and in an economy that has become less dynamic over recent decades. So the Productivity Commission report that you'll see tomorrow proposes 5 ways to respond to all of these pressures, all of these trends and transitions. And the PC calls it its policy agenda for a more productive Australia. And the 5 parts are this. Firstly, building an adaptable workforce to supply the skilled workers for Australia's future economy. Secondly, harnessing data, digital technology and diffusion to capture the dividend of new ideas. 3, creating a more dynamic economy through fostering competition, efficiency and contestability in markets. Fourthly, lifting productivity in the non-market sector to deliver high-quality services at the lowest cost. And fifthly, securing net zero at least cost to limit the productivity damage caused by climate change. Now, these groupings that the PC is proposing are useful to us. They align pretty closely with what we've been talking about over the life of this new federal government, about the opportunities of the energy transition, the possibilities of data and digital, and the big shift to services, particularly the care economy. Now, obviously, no government is expected to pick up and run with every single recommendation of the Productivity Commission. No government has, and no government will. In fact, precisely 0 recommendations from the last 5-yearly review were fully implemented by our predecessors. And half of these ones tomorrow involve or are exclusively for the states, and so we need to discuss them with the states as well. But a major point that I wanted to convey to you today is that there are more ways than one to satisfy our objectives when it comes to productivity. Multiple pathways, and not all of them in the report I release tomorrow, will be consistent with the government's priorities or values. For example, we don't believe that productivity gains come from scorched earth industrial relations, for example, or from abolishing clean energy programs. Instead, we believe we'll get these productivity gains from investing in our people and in their abilities, from fixing our energy markets, from making it easier to adapt and adopt technology so that it works for us, not against us, and by creating the stability and the certainty necessary for capital to flow towards areas where we have advantages and opportunities to underpin a more modern, deeper, broader industrial base. We want to maximise opportunities in energy, not just minimise costs. We want more cooperative workplaces, not more insecurity and conflict. But I hope that these points of difference that you'll see tomorrow don't dominate our discussion of the report, especially when there is so much common ground to be recognised and so much progress to be made. Our government is already working on more than 2/3 of the 29 reform directions outlined in the report, and it's methodically considering the specific recommendations that sit under those directions. As I said before, something like 36 lie at least in part with the states, and it's on the agenda for a meeting of my state colleagues and I in June. But we already have a comprehensive reform agenda to grow our economy and lift our living standards by investing the right way in productivity growth. Let me give you some examples today. To expand opportunities to work and learn in the future economy, we are putting in place cheaper early childhood education and better paid parental leave, hundreds of thousands of TAFE places and additional university places in areas of particular need, a university accord that will drive lasting improvements to higher education, a national skills agreement to reform vocational education and training, Jobs and Skills Australia to strategically plan for the workforce of the future, and a digital and tech skills compact to enable tech workers to earn while they learn. We're creating the conditions for more diffusion of digital technology by expanding access to high-speed internet, allocating $3 billion to upgrade the NBN, with $1.6 billion of this dedicated to improving connectivity in regional, rural and remote Australia, in addition to $656 million to address other connectivity issues in rural and remote Australia as well. And all of that paired with our cybersecurity strategy and expanding the use of digital ID to make it easier for Australians to access more than 125 different government services. We're making our economy more dynamic with a sustainable finance agenda to enable capital to flow more effectively and efficiently. Working with the states and territories to expedite zoning, planning and land release as part of our housing accord. Modernising cross-border processes and reducing compliance costs in trade, deepening commercial relationships across the Asia-Pacific, creating room for more skilled migration by slashing the visa backlog, through our migration review and through work to support business adoption of AI and other new technologies. We've got a big focus on services and the care economy. The Strengthening Medicare Task Force will enable GPs, nurses and allied health professionals to work together for better patient outcomes. We'll have more to say about our review of the NDIS in this term of government. And we're also exploring new funding models to promote better public outcomes through place-based approaches. And we're building new partnerships for productivity as well by revitalising bargaining through a focus on grasping the industrial opportunities of net zero, including through the National Reconstruction Fund, and through AUKUS, an investment in our national security, our national economy, that will support 20,000 jobs in sectors like technology and advanced manufacturing. And all of this shows that across each of the 5 areas of reform identified by the Productivity Commission, the government is acting in methodical and meaningful ways to turn our productivity performance around. Now, I said earlier that I'd talk about how we approach and how we measure this productivity challenge. And so I wanted to finish with a few thoughts on that today. At the start of January and later on in January, in a longer piece of writing, I flagged my belief that we can improve and bolster and make more relevant the way the PC goes about its really important work, all without interfering with its independence or its core focus on productivity. Now, the PC's played an important role in economic reform over a long period of time, but its structure and remit hasn't changed for 25 years, and our productivity challenge has. It's evolved. To elevate the economic reform discussion, we need to ensure that we've got a PC which is suited to the times. That could mean a more strategic focus on how we maximise the opportunities in these areas of economic transformation, including especially the shift to net zero. It could mean building a better understanding of how we measure productivity and the magnitude of the challenge before us. But what it has to mean, what it must mean, is the evolution of a more meaningful, expanded research agenda and a stronger reform blueprint. This is something that I'm giving further thought to, and I'll have more to say about the future of the PC later in the year. But we all want to turn the headwinds described in this report into tailwinds in our economy. We all want better living standards. We all recognise the central role of productivity growth in that endeavour and in that effort. How we go about it is contested, as it should be when so much is at stake. That's why so much of our government's time and effort has been spent building a serious economic reform agenda, one that can better pair productivity with a full employment economy that offers those opportunities to more of our people in more corners of the country. Now, the PC report that you'll see tomorrow will assist us to refine and define the way we move forward. But improving productivity isn't just the task of one government. It's a national task with business, investors, all levels of government, workers and their unions pulling together in multiple ways on multiple fronts to move further and faster towards our destination and our collective mission, which is improved living standards for our people and decent incomes and a better, more secure and more productive future built together. Thanks very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Treasurer. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jared Ball. I'm the Chief Economist at CEDA, and it's a privilege to be able to have the Q&A session with the Treasurer today and to be able to moderate it. As always, at our events, there's a number of different ways that you can ask your questions. You can do it virtually via Pigeonhole, and I'm glad to say that Pigeonhole already looks like it's running hot with questions, which makes my job a lot easier. But also we do have roving mics, so if you would like to grab a mic, please put your hand up and a CEDA staff member will come and find you. And I will apply the Tony Jones rule. There will not be comments, just questions would be great. Thank you. And of course, if you could state your name and your organisation for the Treasurer's benefit, that would be fantastic as well. So I do want to start with a question that is, I guess, the top one on Pigeonhole, but one that I thought that I would ask you anyway, and that is around tax reform. We sort of saw some of the reaction to some of the super tax changes. A number of economists I saw kind of said, well, this is the way that reform, particularly in an area like tax, is done now. It's bite-sized and manageable kind of changes. On the other hand, we have Ken Henry this morning talking about the need for big bang tax reform, particularly in relation to productivity. What's your thinking on the approach to reform more broadly, but particularly in an area like tax, which has obviously been quite contentious and difficult over time, but really central to the productivity challenge that you've outlined?
Yeah. I worked closely with Ken on his tax review in the course of the last Labor government, and I talk to Ken from time to time about these issues. One of the things I learned from that period is that you need to, if you want to reform the tax system, in my view, you need to do it in a staged, methodical way. And I think for all of you that observed some of the frankly hyperventilating about what was a very modest change to superannuation tax concessions would understand, as I do, that tax reform is difficult in this country. And so in my view, you make your priorities known. In our case, multinational taxes. We're working very closely with friends around the world on multinational tax. We've got a proposal out there on superannuation tax concessions, which allow for the concessions to still be available to everyone, but slightly less generous for people who are in that top 0.5% of superannuation balances. A pretty modest change, but a meaningful one when it comes to the structural position of the budget. I think inevitably every budget, whether it's a Labor budget or a budget handed down by the other side of politics, needs to contemplate some combination of three things. Spending restraint, which we were able to show in October. Trimming spending, where that spending is not especially productive, where we're not getting value for money. and modest but meaningful tax reform in areas like super and multinational taxes. And so that's the approach that we've taken. Ken is in favour and on the record multiple times over a long period of time for something more comprehensive. We've got a different set of priorities when it comes to that.
All right, thank you. And we also have a question around the China-Australia relationship. I mean, the theme of your speech was around turning headwinds into tailwinds, and I guess one of the big tailwinds that we do have in the economy at the moment is on the export side, and particularly a recovery in the services exports area, which is critical for our relationship with China. The question is really around how do we balance those economic issues with the ever-growing concerns that there are around national security, and obviously with the announcement this week. Yeah.
Well, a few things about that. I mean, one of the things that we've really got going for us is these really quite extraordinary commodity prices at the same time as in the last national accounts, the December national accounts, our performance in education and tourism, those sectors were coming roaring back in welcome ways as well, and that's really important. Those things are some of the things we've got going for us. When it comes to how we manage our relationships in the region and what that means for our economy, we believe that everybody in our region's got an interest in a peaceful, prosperous, safe and secure region. And as a middle-sized economy, as reliant as we are on international trade and our relationships in the region, then what we announced earlier in the week is of a piece with that approach, that priority. You know, every country makes its own decisions about its national defence and its national security, and that's appropriate. For us, we've made our priorities clear, which is a peaceful region, prosperous region, safe and secure and stable. That's what that announcement was about. Obviously, some of our relationships in the region are complex. They've become more so in recent years. They might become increasingly so. But our job is to make the right decisions for the right reasons. I believe the AUKUS deal is a good decision, one that I obviously support, and it will be important not just for our national security in the region, but for our national economy too.
All right, we might go back to the PC review a little bit, and another question that's running hot from Anonymous on Pigeonhole, one of our serial contributors. And it's around training and education, and I'm guessing that this is a pretty big part of the PC review, and I think a number of economists would say it's probably the biggest opportunity that we've got in terms of increasing productivity in future. What role do you see education and training playing in the future, and particularly around contributing to productivity growth? And I think perhaps we would all like to avoid working an extra 2 hours a week in future, and so we'd all be incentivised to take it up.
Obviously, education and training is absolutely central, and if you think of that another way, we won't achieve the energy transition, we won't make a success out of the services sector and particularly the care economy, we won't make technology work for us unless we get the people part of it right. And there is a big focus in the PC report tomorrow on education and training, and there's a lot of common ground between the government and the PC on this question. And it goes, for us, it really goes to that philosophical view that we have about productivity, which is you get the best productivity outcomes when you're prepared to invest in people. That's a big priority for us, and it's a big part of the report.
All right, I'll just check if there's any questions in the room as I squint through. I do see a question here, if we can get a roving mic. While you're receiving your mic, I'll ask another question from Pigeonhole, from Jodie Curry, and thank you, Jodie, for putting a name to your question. Given today is Closing the Gap Day, what are the key opportunities in supporting the participation of First Nations people in our economy? And I guess a really strong theme that we've been thinking through in terms of this is an economic issue as much as it's a social issue.
Totally. I mean, that's how we approach the opportunity of the voice. If we're serious about dialing up and maximising the participation of more people in our democratic institutions, but also in our economy, then the best place to continue that effort is through recognition and consultation with First Nations people. And the opponents of the voice want to try and pretend that we have to make a choice between doing the right thing on the voice and doing the right thing in our economy, or focusing on some of the nearer term economic issues, and I just completely reject that. You know, I see what we're proposing to do in the voice, along with all of the other policies and programs we have to advance the economic and political participation of First Nations people. I see that as all of one, as parts of one big task that we have. And the big piece of writing I did earlier in the year, if it was about one thing more than anything else, it's that the good countries recognise that strengthening your democratic institutions and strengthening your economy, those are complementary objectives. They're not at odds with each other, and that's what the voice, I think, recognises too.
Question here.
Treasurer David Foreman, thank you for your address. Loving hearing you talk about technology and its role in productivity. We've been able to measure the impact at an enterprise level of technology, but we've never managed, or the PC's never managed to be able to demonstrate the macroeconomic impacts. Does our inability to do that threaten the momentum for continued policy to drive technology diffusion?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Dave, and for the opportunity to speak with you about these issues over a really long period of time. You know, what I tried to get at towards the end of the speech is, measured in all the traditional ways, we've got a productivity problem. That's serious, it matters, we want to turn that around. But we also, in addition to that, need to think differently about productivity in our economy. And I think it is, for a lot of people, a bit of a head-scratcher that we've got these remarkable advances in technology, especially communications technology, but also in health and in other ways, which don't seem to be properly captured by the way we measure and think about and talk about productivity in our economy. And this is one of the reasons why I do want to renovate our economic institutions, including the Productivity Commission, because sometimes what we do in Australia, I think, is we build these great institutions and we work on the assumption that, if they have worked relatively well for us in the past, then that means that we kind of set and forget them. And I want to take a different approach to the PC. And one of the reasons I want to do that is because of your question. You know, how do we do a much better job of firstly recognising, but also making the most out of the ways that technology is changing our communities and our economy? How do we measure that? How do we come at it more effectively? A lot of what we're talking about in the PC report is crucial. But in addition to that, maybe we can use this opportunity, and maybe we can think about the next 5-yearly review as a good opportunity for us to come at this challenge differently as well.
So on a similar thread, we have a question in Pigeonhole around can you expand a little bit further on how we measure and grow productivity in the care economy? And I guess going to your institution point, asking, does productivity and the way we measure it need to be expanded to make sure we don't just have a productive care sector, but one that has better outcomes for people as well?
Yeah, so I've got this great colleague, Andrew Charlton, the new member for Parramatta, and I've been working closely with him on this PC report since we received it last month. And one of the main things, if not the main thing, that Andrew and I talk about is really this issue that goes to Dave's question and goes to your question as well. Everything I just said plus. If we can empower the PC to think about the data that we have differently, to measure productivity in additional ways, then maybe we can recognise some of the quite remarkable progress that has been made in the services sector, the care economy, particularly you think about healthcare, particularly during COVID, which was the great accelerator for some of these things. And so Andrew and I and others, people in the room, around the room here today, we are engaged in a discussion about how do we take this opportunity, not just to measure things differently, but to consider things differently, particularly, and where it has the most relevance, I think, is the care economy and especially health.
I think we've got a question here. No, here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chalmers. Nick Ryan from Lutheran Services. We're a care economy provider. I was very interested in your comments around the whole Productivity Commission role and function, who have done really valuable work for decades around major structural reform issues. I've noticed in the last decade a trend towards royal commissions to undertake deep structural reviews, which of course have an entirely different frame. So I'm thinking banking, disability, aged care, which are two of those areas are ours. I'm wondering, will we see a return to good economic reviews and structural reform, more from the Productivity Commission and perhaps less reliance on royal commissions, please, for those kinds of issues?
Yeah, ideally. I mean, those royal commissions that you mentioned are for when I think governments feel like, well, two things. Firstly, some kind of quite specific crisis is one part of it. But secondly, where you want to compel people to participate, to put it kindly. And so that's where a royal commission, I think, is appropriate. But the main part of your question, do we see a greater role for the PC in economic reform into the future? I do, yeah. But I want to make sure that we set it up to succeed. And I'm not saying it's set up to fail. I don't believe that. But I believe it is time, a bit like what we're doing with the Reserve Bank, recognising the work over a long period of time that the Reserve Bank has done. No economic institution in our society should be beyond a closer look to see if we're getting the best value out of its work. And this is not a partisan comment and it's not a shot at the PC, but I think sometimes the PC gets treated as a sort of an ideological parking lot for issues that governments don't want to come at yet. And we've not approached it that way. In the last 9 months, we've got some important work in early childhood education and in other ways. So there's the supply side of it, the work of the PC. How do we resource it and make sure that it's got the right agenda and the right framework and guidance? That's on the kind of supply side. But on the demand side, to make sure that governments are using it the right way. And we intend to use it the right way, obviously.
Another question here.
James Sturgis from Regional Development Australia, Ipswich and West Moreton. I'm glad to hear the discussion and point about the renewable energy, the energy transition. I suppose I'm just really interested to hear how important it is for Australia not only to achieve it by the date that we're trying to achieve it, but how important it is to Australia for building our own technology businesses and getting a real feel for, from a macro point of view, of how we really make the best of this energy transition for our longevity, not just the energy needs, but actually building the industry.
Yeah, thanks for the question. A lot of the commentary around cleaner, cheaper energy and the industrial part of that revolves at the moment around what the Americans are doing with their Inflation Reduction Act, as you would know. And if you think about what the Americans are doing combined with how the Europeans have responded to that, a lot of people in the commentary talk about this kind of race to the bottom on subsidies and support for green industries and green tech, whereas I see it as this kind of race to the top. And we should be in that, and we are in that, and Australia has massive advantages in areas like critical minerals, battery manufacturing, hydrogen, particularly clean hydrogen. We've got so many advantages here, and we shouldn't fear and we shouldn't shirk from a race to the top on clean energy technology. We are really enthusiastic in our government, not just in Chris Bowen's portfolio, not just in Ed Husick's portfolio, not just in my portfolio, but right across the cabinet. All the foreign-facing portfolios, everybody is engaged in what I think will be the most important thing that we do in our economy, however long this government is in office. I feel like in the future, they will write about the 2020s as the defining decade, a really important decade, a big window of opportunity. And the thing that they will view that through is whether or not we made the most of our opportunities in cleaner and cheaper energy and what that meant for our ability to create a broader and deeper industrial base. one that creates new industries but also maximises our traditional strengths in resources and agriculture and elsewhere. I think it's that important. And, you know, I hope I conveyed that in the sense of how we respond and think about the Productivity Commission review. The Productivity Commission is very focused on that transition. I think it will probably be the most important thing that we grapple with in the life of this government.
We've got a question here which might have to be our final one.
Thank you, Leo Hammett. I was just wishing to tease out, if I may, some of the PC review as it relates to the significant investment across infrastructure, and particularly as it relates to how what comment or perspectives they might put forward or have put forward regarding the planning, funding and delivery of key infrastructure.
Well, a couple of things, and obviously I encourage you to read the 9 volumes tomorrow when it pops up on the Productivity Commission website around the middle of the day. But when it comes to infrastructure, I mean, all of the perennial challenges, cost effectiveness, labour force, you know, whether we're building smart infrastructure, particularly in our cities and suburbs, the whole connectivity piece, which obviously has a traditional meaning, but also increasingly a technological meaning. You know, these are some of the things that the report grapples with, and they are some of the things that we grapple with as a government. We think about connectivity in its broadest sense, and we think about infrastructure, whether it's technological or social or physical infrastructure, which is central to your industry. You know, we recognise that in the last few years the pressures have been immense. The inflationary pressures and the workforce pressures have combined to make it really hard to build stuff. And so we have to crack that. We have to crack the skills and labour shortages. We have to get the technological bit of it right. We have to get the supply chains right, another big part of the challenge. And the PC report talks a bit about all of that, and we will continue to talk a bit about that as well.
All right, final, very brief question over here.
Thanks so much, Treasurer Caitlin Byrne from Griffith University. I wanted to just focus on this big announcement of the AUKUS deal.
Yeah.
You know, this is a huge investment by government. We're going to see submarines in decades. I'd be really keen to hear how you describe to families around Australia what are the economic benefits and the benefits for productivity that we might see in the shorter term.
Yeah, thank you for that. So if you think about this investment, which is seen primarily through the prism of national security, and fair enough, it's you know, a sizable investment in our resources in our defence forces. But I would encourage people to think about it much more broadly than that, and this goes to your question. When it comes to technological skills, when it comes to advanced manufacturing, when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to energy efficiency, AUKUS brings all of these things together. And yes, $9 billion over the course of the forward estimates is a substantial amount of money, but none of it adds to the deficit, completely offset over the forward estimates. 50 to 58 billion over the 10-year horizon is not a small amount of money either. But over a 10-year period, you think about what we get from that. Manufacturing jobs, training and upskilling, technological spillovers, all of these sorts of things that our economy is relying on into the future. And I understand that there are lots of different ways that you can make an investment of that size. But when we think about value for money, we need to think about it much more substantially than the submarines that will be produced. We need to think about the jobs, the technology and the knowledge and the opportunities that will be created as well.
Thank you, Treasurer. I'd now like to call Deborah Learson, Executive General Manager of Global Client Solutions at Commonwealth Bank, to move a vote of thanks.
Thanks, Jared.
Jared, thanks so much for the warm introduction. This is really a fascinating discussion, and it's important for all of us across the public and private spheres to be coming together to share our views on the economy and to partner in a joint course for the future. I found it particularly insightful to hear Dr. Chalmers speak about the size of the challenges we confront and the new investment that's needed. including on key enablers to improve our productivity. The energy transition will involve hundreds of billions of dollars of new investment by 2050, plus thousands of new clean energy workers. And as the Treasurer has noted, partnership between public and private sector will be critical to unlocking the capital needed to achieve these urgent goals. We at Commonwealth Bank stand ready to support Australia's institutions and businesses. As we saw during COVID, the public and private sectors working closely together will be critical as we navigate the challenging economic environment and our pathway to net zero, and as we build the infrastructure of the future economy. Now, I'd like to thank Dr. Jim Chalmers for sharing with us the government's economic and fiscal priorities ahead of the federal budget, and for filling up my Friday afternoon with 9 volumes to read. And thank you for the fantastic speakers, Sharon Smith, Jared Ball, Professor Carolyn Evans, who joined Dr. Chalmers in this insightful discussion. And thank you, Uncle Thomas. What a welcome. Thank you to our hosts, CEDA, for organizing today's event and for bringing us all together today for this important discussion. Now, I'd like to hand over to Sharon Smith to formally close the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, and what a great discussion. I think my 2 big reflections on the discussion was the optimism the Treasurer brought to the discussion, and the other thing was the perfect synchronicity of the Productivity Commission recommendations, the government agenda, and CEDA's very own areas of impact, which we look to share more with you in coming months. Just looking forward, we've got a massive program of events coming up in Brisbane over the next 2 months. I'd just like to share a few highlights with you. Tomorrow, the economic discussion continues with our Chief Economist Jared Ball and Andrew Barker sharing a Queensland economic update. This is a trustee-only event, but we do have a couple of places available if anyone would like to join us, so contact a CEDA member in the room. On the 19th of April, we welcome Federal Minister Madeleine King for an update on Australia's resources sector, and on the 3rd of May, we have a Queensland Health Outlook with the Honourable Yvette Darth. On the 19th of May, we have a climate and energy conference which will address a lot of the issues that Dr. Chalmers spoke about today. This event in particular we're really excited about because it's a real demonstration of CEDA's power to bring together experts from across business, academia and government. And it would be remiss of me not to mention our annual State of the Nation conference on the 13th and 14th of June in Canberra. Early bird tickets are now available on sale, and on day 2, we'll once again run departmental roundtables for Lead and Elevate trustees. 2 other really quick reminders from me from CEDA. We've currently got a member survey open. We're welcoming feedback from all members. And finally, CEDA has developed in recent months some various training courses enabling people to develop broader economic and policy understanding. The details of this and all our events are available on ceda.com.au. In closing, I'd like to thank our CEDA team who worked tirelessly to bring these events together, and once again thank the Commonwealth Bank, Griffith University and Technology One for their support. And of course, the Treasurer, who went to Griffith University, by the way, for sharing his bold vision for Australia. Thank you and enjoy your lunch. Goodbye.